Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly, very quietly, into the velvet-lined world of the English court, where every breath seems to echo louder than it should, and every step you take feels like it might land you in someone's bad graces before you even know their name. You stand in the corridor, the air smelling faintly of beeswax and damp stone, and you can practically feel the walls leaning in, listening. And honestly, in a place like this, you probably won't survive the week if you don't learn the hidden rules fast. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move through the corridor, your fingertips grazing the embroidered hangings that tell stories far more honest than the courtiers who walk beneath them. Even in the dim glow of the torches, you can make out scenes stitched centuries earlier, kings hunting, queens praying, armies marching. But tonight, you're not here for tapestry mythology. You're here to understand why everyone around you speaks in half-truths, implied warnings, and strangely polished smiles. The English court, especially in the Tudor and Stuart eras, is famous for its glitter, its gossip, and its ability to ruin people before breakfast. That's your first mainstream historical fact of this journey. No European monarchy weaponized etiquette quite like England did. The French might claim sophistication, but the English perfected the quiet dagger behind a compliment. You'll see that dagger again later, but for now, just remember that nothing, absolutely nothing, is done openly here if it can be done silently instead. As you continue, a lady-in-waiting sweeps past you with such practiced grace that you almost miss the brief flick of her eyes, the one that checks whether you yield space quickly enough. It's a test. Everything is a test. Even the way you pull back a fraction of a second too late sends a message. You're still learning the rules. She notices. They always notice. Someone once joked, here's your first tiny joke of the night, that the court doesn't actually need guards. Everyone's too busy judging each other to attempt anything physically dangerous. And while that may not be strictly true, historians still argue whether the psychological battles fought here were more vicious than the military ones waged abroad. A sword wound heals, a ruined reputation. Good luck. You reach the end of the corridor where two golden doors loom, carved with lions and thistles tangled together in a pattern that seems decorative until you look closer. It's not just decoration, it's propaganda. The lion represents power, the thistle represents resilience. And the message is simple: the crown sees everything. Even the quirky tidbit hiding under that symbolism, court rumors, claimed the thistles whispered when someone lied near them. Not historically accurate, but very on brand for a building where everyone assumes even the furniture is judging them. A guard shifts his weight beside the door. He doesn't speak, but he doesn't have to. His silence asks its own question. Do you belong here? And you answer it the only way you can, by pretending you already know where you're going. You step into a chamber glowing with candlelight. Perfume, sweat, silk, and ambition swirl in the air. Courtiers hover in small clusters, each group orbiting someone more powerful, like planets competing for sunlight. Nobody stands alone, not because they're shy, but because solitude invites speculation, and speculation is the bloodstream of this palace. You drift along the edges, feeling the soft tickle of velvet drapes against your shoulders. Every sound is hushed, even the laughter seems rehearsed, carefully diluted so no one feels threatened by too much joy. If happiness were too loud, someone might accuse you of gaining secret influence. And in the English court, influence is dangerous currency. Too little, and you vanish. Too much, and you vanish faster. A servant glides past, carrying a tray of spiced wine, and you almost whisper, "Thank you," but stop yourself. This is where your second tiny joke lands. Saying "thank you" too warmly might be considered suspicious affection, and the last thing you want is to be rumoured to be in league with the kitchen staff. At court, friendships are political liabilities unless the Crown approves them. Even Queen Elizabeth I famously kept her ladies-in-waiting competing for her attention because unity among them might threaten her control. Someone brushes your sleeve, and when you glance over, you realize it isn't accidental. It's another test. The court communicates more through fabric-to-fabric collisions than honest dialogue. A brush of velvet can mean "move aside." A tap of lace can mean "follow me." A swirl of skirts can mean "stop talking before you ruin your life." You take a quiet breath and scan the room, letting your senses slow. The heat from the candles warms your cheeks. The soft hum of distant musicians vibrates through the floor. The polished floorboards reflect the glittering hems of gowns that cost more than a farmer earns in a decade. Everything is designed to keep you slightly overwhelmed, just manageable enough to follow the rules, but not confident enough to challenge them. A man with meticulously curled hair and a doublet in a shade that screams, "I definitely bribed someone for dye this expensive," stops in front of you. He smiles. Too quickly, too widely, too deliberately. The kind of smile that says, "I'd stab you politely if given permission." His bow is shallow. Yours must be shallower, but for different reasons. There is no handbook for this. Even the so-called rules aren't written down because admitting they exist would destroy their power. He asks where you're from. Not because he cares, but because your answer determines who he should gossip to later. You respond vaguely, as is safest. Ambiguity protects you more than allegiance ever will. He leans in slightly, close enough to appear friendly, far enough that he can deny any familiarity if questioned. That distance is one of the secret measures of the court. Too close means presumption. Too far means disrespect. Landing in the middle is an art you'll spend the next 11 sections mastering. Musicians strike a new chord, something soft, something meant to mask conversations without truly hiding them. The English court adored this trick. Create noise that isn't loud enough to drown out words, but distracting enough that everyone strains to hear. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some households actually hired professional coughers to mask sensitive discussions. Not here, not tonight, but the tradition lived on in strange ways. You sense shifting currents, people adjusting their stances, eyes darting toward a doorway you haven't yet noticed. Someone important is approaching. You don't know whether to bow, curtsy, or simply evaporate into the wall. Before you decide, someone behind you whispers the most important advice you will receive in this castle. Don't look eager. Eagerness is the scent of the doomed. You straighten just a little. Not proudly, not timidly, just neutrally. And for the first time tonight, someone nearby gives a subtle nod of approval. Maybe you will survive the week after all. You drift forward with the others, carried almost involuntarily by the subtle tide of bodies angling toward the same invisible center. No one announces the Queen's arrival, not with trumpets, not with declarations, because here in the English court, sound isn't needed to enforce hierarchy. Position does that all by itself. You feel the crowd rearrange around you like iron filings reacting to a magnet, every person shifting into their ordained orbit without a word. This is your first lesson in what I called ranking by heartbeats. The idea that status isn't just spoken, it's felt in the way the air moves when certain people enter a room. A soft rustle of skirts passes near your elbow. You don't see who made it, but you feel its meaning. Move 1 inch back. And so you do. 1 inch, Anything more and you risk seeming over-eager. Anything less and you risk being accused of assuming superiority. Court life, you're realizing, is basically a never-ending geometry problem, except if you solve it wrong, someone else gets your job, your dignity, or your head. Speaking of geometry, here's your first little joke this round. Congratulations! You've joined the only community in history where standing in the wrong triangle could start a scandal. A mainstream historical fact threads itself naturally into this scene. At Elizabeth I's court, precedence, who stands where, was governed by a famously complex system of nobility ranks, marital status, bloodlines, and royal favour. People could and did argue for months about who should walk ahead of whom, and the Queen loved watching them squirm. Not because she was cruel, well, sometimes that too, but because these invisible rules kept her court constantly negotiating its own internal hierarchy, which meant they had less energy left to plot against her. You feel someone's gaze on you. A man wearing a dark doublet, expensive, understated, and terrifying in its precision, studies the way you breathe. You didn't think your breathing could be political, but here, even exhaling too audibly can get you labelled unrefined. The English court once dismissed a nobleman for sighing too dramatically near the monarch. Historians still argue whether this was a legitimate breach of decorum or whether someone simply wanted him gone and seized the opportunity. The fact that either explanation is plausible says everything about where you're standing. You inhale carefully, quietly, elegantly. You try to mimic the court elite who somehow manage to breathe as though their ribs themselves have manners. Someone ahead of you attempts to shift closer to the Queen's expected path, and the crowd reacts instantly. Shoulders stiffen, a ripple of fabric whispers no, and a few fans flick open with a speed that would impress a modern stage magician. You don't know the offending woman's name, but you know this much. She just violated a rule of proximity, stepping into a space she hadn't earned. And this is where the fringe tidbit sneaks in. Some Tudor courtiers believed your physical closeness to the monarch could absorb her virtue, almost like spiritual osmosis. People would angle themselves toward the sovereign at every opportunity, hoping to catch a drop of intangible blessing. Silly? Maybe, but in a time when monarchs were considered divinely appointed, no superstition felt too small to cling to. You keep your distance, a safe distance, the sort of distance that says, I respect you, but I also don't want to be executed for enthusiasm. It's a very specific range, about 2 paces from the inner cluster, close enough that you appear attentive, far enough that you don't seem presumptuous. Imagine a social distancing rule invented 400 years early, but instead of avoiding illness, you're avoiding political collapse. A servant shifts the placement of a single chair, just one chair, and the movement ripples through the room. You catch yourself wondering how a piece of furniture can wield power until you recall something important. The closer the chair is to the monarch, the higher the status of the person allowed to place themselves in it. Sit somewhere unauthorized and you don't just commit a faux pas, you commit a symbolic rebellion. Your second joke arrives right on cue. If modern workplaces adopted this system, half of corporate drama would simply be employees physically wrestling for the chair nearest the boss. The Queen finally appears, or rather, her presence appears before she does. You feel the air sharpen. The courtiers collectively straighten, though none appear to move. It's like watching a flock of birds adjust direction at the same time, except with more jewels and higher stakes. The Queen glides into view, radiating authority so effortlessly that you feel yourself sinking into awe, even though you promised you wouldn't. She walks past you, and though her eyes don't meet yours, the corner of her gaze brushes your silhouette, and that alone sends a tremor through your chest. You're not sure whether this counts as acknowledgement, but several courtiers notice it, which might be even more important. The English court ran heavily on interpretation. Who thinks what happened is often more consequential than what actually occurred. A debate simmering in historical circles floats through your mind. Did monarchs deliberately use ambiguous gestures to keep courtiers guessing? Historians still argue whether Elizabeth the Fauntouin smiled at rivals strategically or simply because she enjoyed the performance of mystery. The truth is probably some combination of both, which is another way of saying royalty kept everyone, including you, perpetually off balance. The Queen pauses to speak with a nobleman at the centre of the chamber. You study their body language, trying to decode what the court already knows instinctively. Their distance says respect, their downward glances say humility. The tilt of the man's chin says he hopes for favour. The tilt of the Queen's head says she is aware of his hope, but not impressed by it. Watching the two of them is like watching a negotiation in the form of choreography. The English court lived for this dance. Someone behind you murmurs, "Too close." Another whispers, "No, too far." The contradictions swirl like incense. You realize that everyone here maintains their own internal rulebook, shaped by ambition, fear, pride, and a generous dash of paranoia. No wonder newcomers drown so easily. You shift your stance again, subtly adjusting your shoulder angle to match those around you. It's a small change, almost imperceptible, but it signals something crucial, that you've begun to tune yourself to the court's frequency. Court life, you're learning, is less about understanding rules and more about absorbing them through proximity, observation, and an alarming amount of social pressure. Your final joke wanders in casually. If you ever feel overwhelmed by modern social etiquette, just remember that at least you don't have to calculate your personal radius in relation to a monarch every time you enter a room. You cast one final glance around, letting your senses absorb the tension, the powdered wigs, the scented candles, the unspoken codes. The Queen shifts her attention toward another group, and the entire room subtly reshapes again, like dough being kneaded by invisible hands. You're caught in that movement, neither resisting nor surrendering, simply learning the rhythm as it carries you along. And somewhere inside you a realization begins to settle. To survive the English court, you don't need to be bold or brilliant. You just need to be exquisitely aware of where you stand, whom you face, how you breathe, and when to step aside. And maybe, just maybe, you're getting better at it already. You remain in the gently shifting current of bodies as the Queen drifts farther into the chamber, but something subtle changes. Without anyone announcing it, without a single voice instructing you, everyone recalibrates their positions in relation to her. You watch this happen. Tiny side steps, slightest angling of shoulders, micro-adjustments of elbows. It's like being inside a living compass, every individual orienting toward the magnetic pull of royal presence. And that's when you catch on to the next unwritten rule. Proximity at court isn't merely spatial, it's existential. The closer you are to the center of power, the more dangerous your life becomes. But too far from it, you become invisible. And in the English court, invisibility is just a slow-motion execution. You feel someone brush past your sleeve deliberately, and you remember Section 1's warning, touches here carry entire political essays. This one says, follow me, but also pretend you decided yourself. So you drift after the figure, keeping the precise distance the court demands. Close, but not so close that anyone might accuse you of trying to eavesdrop, flatter, or, worst of all, look important. Historians still argue whether courtiers truly believed that a single misplaced step could doom their fortunes, but based on the expression of the man now edging 2 inches from a table leg, you suspect the belief was very real. This table, by the way, is your mainstream historical fact. Certain pieces of furniture in royal chambers were permanently associated with specific ranks. Place yourself beside the wrong item and you're not merely out of place, you're out of line. The person you're trailing pauses at the edge of a velvet-draped alcove. You slip in after them and suddenly the noise of the hall softens as though you've stepped behind a waterfall. These tiny architectural pockets scattered around palaces, alcoves, window recesses, gallery corners were the birthplace of half the kingdom's biggest scandals. And here's your quirky tidbit. One courtier wrote that the safest way to avoid trouble was to avoid alcoves entirely because nothing good was ever whispered in them. Naturally, people ignored this advice constantly. The woman you followed turns to you. Her face is perfectly composed, neither inviting nor rejecting you. She doesn't smile because smiling would imply she needs your approval. She also doesn't frown because frowning would imply you're worth disapproving of. Instead, she holds her expression in a state of polite neutrality, the same expression diplomats spend decades practicing in front of polished silver. "You're learning," she murmurs, gaze fixed somewhere beyond your shoulder. That's another proximity rule. You rarely look directly at the person you're speaking to when you're discussing anything meaningful. Straight eye contact is reserved for greetings, accusations, or proposals of marriage, none of which you need right now. You simply give the smallest nod you can manage without your neck locking up. The woman continues, "If you wish to last here, remember this. Proximity is privilege, but it is never owned, only borrowed." You try to respond, but she's already drifting away like a mist, dissolving into warmer air. And you can't follow her now, not unless you want the court to think you're courting favour too openly. The English court despised obvious ambition. They wanted clever ambition, sneaky ambition, ambition that could deny its own existence while simultaneously rearranging the entire political landscape. You shift back into the main chamber, letting the ambient sound wrap around you again. Musicians play a soft pavan, the rhythm slow enough that even the stiffest noble could pretend to glide elegantly. You notice how the dancers maintain exact distances between each other, never too close, never too far. Even in leisure, the unspoken hierarchy dictates the choreography. And that brings up your second joke of the night. If modern dating apps use Tudor-era proximity rules, everyone would be matched based on who stood the correct number of inches from the nearest snack table. Someone taps your shoulder, lightly, like a feather landing. It's a young court page, cheeks flushed from running errands that probably involve carrying secrets instead of letters. He gestures for you to follow him. But, unlike earlier, this invitation isn't subtle because he doesn't need it to be. Pages existed in a liminal space, too young to be political threats, too essential to be ignored. They were the only people who could move freely within the court without risking offence. He leads you not toward the Queen, but toward a side corridor filled with portraits. The air grows cooler, quieter. Candles burn lower here, and the paintings stare down at you with the smugness of people who survived the court long enough to commission art. The boy stops beside a portrait of a nobleman with suspiciously large ruff and a ring heavy enough to double as a paperweight. "He stood too close," the page whispers, pointing to the painted figure. "Lost everything." You blink. "For standing too close to whom?" The page shrugs. "Depends who you ask." And there it is, your scholarly debate requirement fulfilled. Because the truth is, even historians can't always agree whether someone's downfall was caused by etiquette, politics, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The boy darts off before you can ask more. You're left alone with hundreds of painted eyes judging your posture, your breath, your very existence. You turn slowly, and as you do, you understand something chilling. Proximity doesn't just determine your status in the present, it determines how future generations will interpret your fate. Stand near the wrong faction, the wrong lover, the wrong corridor, and the chroniclers will write your name with a footnote that reads, "Should have known better." You walk back toward the main hall, feeling the distance of each footstep as though it carries a story. And when you return, you feel the room's pulse again, like a living creature breathing in and out, drawing courtiers closer to the queen, pushing others to the outer edges where power grows thin and brittle. A man accidentally steps 1 inch too close to a noblewoman. She stiffens, and you can sense the social temperature drop 5 degrees. That 1 inch might cost him a month of invitations. Court life is petty in ways that could power an entire season of reality TV. Your final joke floats gently into your mind. At this court, even your shadow has to know where to stand. You find your own place again, measured, balanced, deliberate. Not too near, not too far. You can almost feel the court's unspoken approval humming faintly around you. And as the queen glides past once more, brushing the air just beside you, you realize that surviving here isn't about brilliance or bravery, it's about mastering the art of being precisely, intentionally, exquisitely present. You barely have time to savor the small victory of not embarrassing yourself with proximity when another rule slinks into view, this one wrapped in velvet, perfume, and danger. A servant glides past carrying a lacquered tray filled with small objects, folded ribbons, tiny boxes, sprigs of herbs tied with silk. At any other place, these would look like tokens of affection, friendly gestures, maybe even charming curiosities. But here, they're landmines. You shift your weight just enough to avoid appearing curious, because in the English court, curiosity is how people accidentally inherit enemies. Still, you can't help noticing how courtiers inspect these items with unnerving seriousness. A ribbon isn't just a ribbon. A box isn't just a box. Everything is encoded. Everything is a message. And tonight you're about to learn the rule that governs them all. Gifts here are never gifts. They're tests, traps, and tiny political declarations disguised as generosity. Someone beside you, a nobleman, with the kind of beard that says, "I spend 2 hours sculpting this every morning," leans toward the tray as though examining jewelry. But you catch the flicker of tension in his jaw. This isn't admiration. It's calculation. Because accepting a token means acknowledging the giver. And acknowledging the giver means aligning yourself with their faction, or at least appearing to. A mainstream historical fact threads effortlessly into this moment. At the Tudor and Stuart courts, offering or receiving gifts was strictly regulated by custom. Monarchs publicly displayed gifts on New Year's Day to signal approval or lack thereof. Acceptance meant favour, rejection meant public humiliation. Even the Queen's ladies sometimes competed to give the most flattering present, hoping it would elevate them above rivals. So yes, in this hall, generosity is just politics wearing perfume. A page approaches you carrying a tiny parcel wrapped in red silk. Red is unfortunate. Red means something urgent, something bold, possibly something incriminating. You freeze so quickly that even the candle flames seem to pause. The page tilts his head, waiting. Several courtiers glance your way. Subtle glances, the kind that pretend not to exist while craving scandal. You can practically hear the unspoken questions. Who is trying to court your favour? Why you? Who benefits? Who suffers? Then comes your first joke of the night. In the English court, even a fruit basket could get you executed if someone thought the pears looked too politically enthusiastic. You offer the page a polite decline, soft, measured, respectful. You lift your hand just enough to show refusal, but not enough to seem offended. The page nods once and drifts away, leaving the silk-wrapped mystery for another unsuspecting victim. You release a breath you didn't realize you were holding. Apparently, refusing a gift is its own art form. Another woman steps beside you, her gown shimmering like dew on morning grass. She doesn't smile, but her eyes glint with the sharp amusement of someone who has seen far too many people undone by fancy fabric. "Good," she murmurs without turning. Red is rarely a blessing. You pretend not to hear. Pretending not to hear is often safer than acknowledging you heard the wrong thing. She continues anyway. Understand this. Gifts bind, gifts implicate, gifts speak, and some speak louder than their givers. Her tone drapes over you like a cloak you didn't ask for. She gently adjusts a fold of her sleeve, an elegant little gesture that means, "Don't worry, I won't trap you." Yet. Historians still argue whether the exchange of small tokens began as innocent traditions or whether they were always weapons. Some say the custom dates back to medieval courts, where gestures replaced literal currency when money was scarce. Others argue it evolved into something far more manipulative once kings and queens realized symbols could terrify their subjects more effectively than swords. As usual, the court prefers the version that keeps everyone on edge. A court musician begins plucking a lute, and the sound ripples through the hall like someone painted the air with gold. Courtiers lean into the music, floating toward one another in carefully rehearsed clusters. And suddenly, the entire room becomes a marketplace, not for goods, but for influence. Ribbons exchange hands, flowers are tucked into sleeves, fans flutter open to reveal painted scenes that hint at secret alliances. It's elegant, it's beautiful, it's also terrifying. A nobleman you vaguely recognize approaches with a box carved from smooth walnut. "A trifle," he says politely. Trifle is court language for "I want something from you, but I'm pretending I don't." You bow your head, just slightly. "Too kind," you whisper. "But I fear I'd misinterpret your generosity." His eyes widen a fraction. That's a sophisticated refusal, one that says you respect him but aren't stupid. He smiles, impressed. Not warmly. Nobody here smiles warmly unless they're plotting something, but with a hint of admiration. Then he moves on, offering the box to someone braver or more desperate. Your quirky tidbit arrives wrapped neatly inside this interaction. Some courtiers deliberately gave ambiguous gifts just to watch others panic. A simple sprig of rosemary could signal loyalty, mourning, remembrance, or, if twisted into a knot, romantic interest. Many letters from the era contain frantic notes like, "I received time." What does it mean? Nobody ever really knew. You weave through the hall, careful not to brush against the wrong person. Every movement feels like wading through verbal quicksand. Someone hands another courtier a painted fan. Someone else slips a ribbon into a sleeve with a flourish that could inspire poetry or treason. Then you see it, the queen herself receiving a gift, a delicate golden pomander filled with herbs. She accepts it with a gracious tilt of her head, holding it just long enough for everyone watching to see her approval. And instantly, the giver's social value skyrockets. Courtiers turn toward him like sunflowers toward daylight, yet even here, danger lurks. Accept too many gifts and you appear greedy, too few and you appear ungrateful. Accept the wrong one and you inadvertently declare war. You find yourself wondering how anyone manages to sleep at night with so many unspoken expectations dangling in the air like jeweled daggers. But then again, maybe that's why court beds were famously uncomfortable. They weren't for rest, they were for strategy. A servant passes you carrying a tray of tiny parchments, notes written in handwriting so elegant it practically curtsies on the page. Each note is folded a different way, sealed a different way, scented a different way. Crease placement alone can communicate entire allegiances. You back away from the tray like it's on fire. Your second joke floats in lazily. The English court is the only place where receiving a handwritten note might require legal counsel. As the evening stretches on, the room grows thicker with perfume, candle smoke, and ambition. You begin to see the patterns: who gives generously, who gives sparingly, who gives strategically, who gives to impress, who gives to threaten, who gives because they've run out of other weapons. Someone drops a small ribbon. A different courtier picks it up, examines the stitching, and pockets it with a smirk that suggests this single scrap of fabric will be tomorrow's gossip. The ripple it creates travels farther than you expect. You watch it move through the room like wind bending grass. That's when your final joke of the section nudges in. Honestly, a modern soap opera could never compete with this level of passive-aggressive gifting. You step back from the swarm of exchanges, keeping your hands commandingly empty. Empty hands mean neutrality. Neutrality means safety, or at least plausible deniability. And in a world where trinkets can topple fortunes, perhaps the wisest rule of all is the simplest one. Sometimes the strongest power move is accepting nothing at all. The candles burn lower now, their soft golden halos floating like sleepy moons above the gathering, and you sense the atmosphere shifting, not quieter, not calmer, just sharper, as though every thread of fabric in the room is suddenly paying attention. And that's when you notice it. The way everyone's attire gleams with intention. Colours speak, fabrics argue. Seams whisper their allegiances to anyone fluent enough to understand. Welcome to the unspoken rule, where clothing speaks long before you do. You stand at the edge of the chamber, letting your eyes adjust to the language of attire. A lady draped in deep green silk glides past, her gown shimmering like dew at dawn. Green here is more than a colour. It signals lineage tied to old noble houses. It hints at loyalty or sometimes ambition, depending on the shade. Too pale, and it says, "I have money, but not old blood, too dark." And it suggests I'm aligning with a faction currently out of favour. Everything woven must be decoded. A mainstream historical fact rises gently to the surface. During the reign of Elizabeth I, the sumptuary laws dictated exactly which classes could wear certain colours and fabrics. Velvet, for example, was restricted to nobility. Ermine fur was practically code for "I am powerful enough to afford" wearing small, expensive animals. Clothing wasn't decoration, it was legislation you wore on your body. You take a step forward, feeling the faint crunch of rushes beneath your shoes, and become painfully aware of your own attire. Nothing flashy, nothing scandalous, nothing that screams, "I'm new." And yet even simplicity can be misinterpreted here. Plain fabrics could imply piety or poverty. Minimal embroidery could read as humility or lack of connections. You suddenly wish your clothes came with subtitles. A courtier wearing a blue doublet trimmed with silver threads pauses near you. His fabric is exquisite, but more importantly, it's expensive. The silver threads alone could buy a cottage. But the blue, that's the real message. Blue traditionally signals wisdom, serenity, or loyalty to the crown. Yet historians still argue whether courtiers wore it to flatter the monarch or to diminish rivals by appearing more virtuous. Intentions are slippery things at court. He nods at your hem as if appraising a horse. "A sensible choice," he says, voice soft enough to pass for politeness. "Neutral fabrics signal neutral disposition." You thank him, carefully avoiding too much warmth. Warmth is dangerous. Warmth can be interpreted as networking, and networking at the wrong moment can inspire rumours with the lifespan of medieval plagues. The man moves on, and a second courtier brushes your sleeve, this one wearing a gown embroidered with tiny gold birds. Birds aren't random. Birds symbolize freedom, hope, and, if pointed downward, loss. These birds soar upward, wings outstretched, a bold message for a place where the only creatures who fly freely are the rumors. She smiles without smiling. Embroidery reveals things people don't dare say openly, she whispers. A person who wears birds is usually dreaming of escape. You nod, because yes, that tracks. Anyone trapped in this palace long enough probably dreams of escape daily. You also notice the birds are stitched with real gold thread, a fringe tidbit worth savouring. Some high-ranking courtiers literally wore fortunes on their sleeves. Their garments doubled as investments, status symbols, and sometimes collateral. It wasn't unheard of for someone to pawn their own clothing during political downturns. Imagine pawning your outfit because your faction lost an argument. You wander deeper into the chamber, watching the court swirl like a painting coming to life. The Queen's ladies wear carefully chosen colours, soft whites, regal purples, strategic reds. Red, ironically, doesn't always signal romance. Sometimes it means influence. Sometimes it signals closeness to the monarch. One rumour, half legend, half intellectual playground, claims that during the late Tudor period, wearing red near the Queen could be interpreted as overstepping. Historians still argue whether this was an actual rule or a myth, exaggerated by playwrights desperate for drama. In a place like this, either explanation feels equally believable. You catch sight of a gentleman wearing black satin, his silhouette sleek as a raven at dusk. Black is the most treacherous colour in the room. Mourning, yes, but also elegance, authority, danger. Some courtiers wore black when they wanted to appear sombre or intimidating. Others wore it simply because the dye cost a fortune and turned heads. But black also has another meaning, one whispered behind gloved hands: ambition without allegiance. Your first joke of the night drifts in like a feather. If the English court had a fashion magazine, the what to wear section would require a PhD, a political advisor, and possibly a séance, and you pause near a group of noble women studying another lady's gown. It's elaborately patterned with crimson vines curling up the sleeves. The vines look beautiful, but the message bold, the placement provocative. And the whispers reach you before the lady herself does. Too daring, too confident. She must want someone to notice her. And then one particularly sharp whisper, she'll regret that by morning. You glance down at your own clothing again, relieved it's safely unremarkable. Here, inconspicuousness feels like armour. No one will analyse you if there's nothing to analyse. A servant passes carrying a tray of tiny mirrors, polished to a shine. Mirrors at court were tools of survival. People used them to make sure their expressions didn't betray jealousy, relief, suspicion, or ambition. Imagine checking your emotional poker face every 5 minutes just so you don't accidentally get demoted. Your second joke slips in easily. If only you could download an app that monitors your facial expressions for court decorum violations. You continue observing the room, cataloguing each message stitched, dyed, or pinned into place. The Queen herself wears a gown of pale gold, subtle, luminous, and nearly impossible to replicate without royal resources. Her dress doesn't just tell the court she is queen, it tells them she doesn't need bright colours to command obedience. A young lord approaches her wearing a sash in a colour that perfectly complements her gown, a calculated choice. He bows deeply and the Queen's eyes flick toward the sash for the briefest moment. Approval? Disapproval? The court holds its breath because interpretation is half the fun or half the terror. You stand at the fringes listening to the rustle of silk, the crackle of hidden meaning, and slowly you begin to understand why everyone here dresses like their life depends on it, because it does. Clothing is camouflage, clothing is confession, clothing is currency, and in the English court, currency determines survival. As the queen turns gracefully, her gown catching the candlelight like a sunrise, you feel the energy shift again. Courtiers swivel toward her, subtly mirroring the color palette of power. Some adjust their cloaks, others carefully fold their sleeves to reveal specific embroideries. You mimic the motions as best you can, hoping not to betray your newcomer status. Your final joke of the night arrives like a wink from history. Honestly, the court spent so much time decoding clothing, they could have invented an entire fashion-based language. "Oh, you're wearing blue, that means please don't poison me today." You take one last look around the chamber, letting the sight of shimmering fabrics, hidden messages, and precarious elegance settle into your mind. If proximity to the queen determines whether you're noticed, then clothing determines how you're remembered. And for now, at least, you're dressed well enough to keep your story going. You step away from the crowded chamber, letting its shimmering fabrics and coded glances dissolve behind you. The hallway you enter is dimmer, quieter, as though the palace itself is exhaling after holding its breath too long. And that's when you begin to notice something unsettling. Even here, far from the music, far from the gifts, far from the velvet swirl of ambition, the walls still feel alive, listening, watching. Because at the English court, privacy isn't something you're granted, it's something you lose the moment you walk through the palace gates. A soft-footed servant glides past you, carrying a lantern. The warm circle of light flickers across your face, and you suddenly become aware of how exposed you feel. You just left a room full of people, and yet somehow this narrow corridor feels less private. The silence is too clean, too deliberate. You realize the palace has eyes even when its courtiers sleep. Your mind drifts toward a mainstream historical fact. Royal residences like Whitehall, Hampton Court and St. James's were architectural rabbit warrens, filled with adjoining chambers, shared staircases, servants' passages, and thin walls. Privacy barely existed. Everyone knew when you woke, when you dined, when you argued, when you coughed suspiciously at midnight. The idea of having a personal space would have been considered adorable, if also laughably unrealistic. A door creaks somewhere behind you, and you turn instinctively. Nothing, no footsteps, no rustle of fabric, just the lingering impression that someone or something just slipped out of sight. The palace is full of these half-sounds, the ghostly echoes of people trying not to be heard. And honestly, your first joke pops into your head before you can stop it. This place is basically the original open-plan office, except with more embroidery and higher stakes. You continue walking. The corridor bends and spirals, leading you toward the royal apartments. You didn't mean to wander this far, yet the court seems to guide you the way river currents guide drifting leaves. Servants appear and vanish at the edges of your vision, carrying linens, candlesticks, letters, tied with ribbon, trays of warm water for hand-washing. Some pass you without looking up. Others flick their eyes toward you for a split second, just long enough to memorize your presence. Then you notice something odd. The bedrooms here are positioned in clusters, not private suites, not secluded havens. Bedrooms meant to be shared, not always by multiple people, but by multiple ears. A peculiar fringe tidbit flutters into memory. Many courtiers slept with attendants in the same room or even the same bed, not for companionship but for surveillance, security, and status. Having someone close enough to hear your snores meant having someone close enough to report your secrets. You tread lightly across creaking floorboards, trying not to imagine your nocturnal rustling being analyzed over breakfast. Lords and ladies weren't the only ones being watched. Servants were too. No one in this palace slept comfortably. And tonight you're learning why. You pause outside a half-open door glowing with candlelight. Inside, you glimpse a lady-in-waiting brushing her hair meticulously. Slow strokes, rhythmic, almost ritualistic. But she isn't alone. A maid sits near the foot of the bed, quietly folding garments. The lady's voice floats through the air, calm and clipped. Fold them softer. The Queen prefers quiet in the early hours. You realize everything, even the sounds of clothing, is curated for the monarch. You slip past the doorway before either woman notices you loitering. Or maybe they do notice. Maybe they're noting the sound of your footfall, the pattern of your hesitation. In this place, noticing is currency. You turn another corner and discover a narrow staircase spiraling upward. A page stands guard at the bottom, not with a weapon, but with the posture of someone who would absolutely tell on you if you took a single step upward. He bows slightly. "Private rooms," he says. You bow back. Understood. Because that's another rule. The palace enforces hierarchy, even when everyone is wearing night clothes. Your second joke of the section wanders in lazily. You can't even wander to the wrong staircase without accidentally declaring political allegiance. Imagine explaining that to a modern security guard. You return down the hallway, drifting past a row of tightly shut doors. Some are decorated with carved lintels, others with painted panels, subtle indicators of rank. Each door is a boundary, but not a barrier. Not here, not really. Anyone with enough motive and enough silence can slip through. A servant brushing past whispers without stopping, "Don't snore." You blink. "Excuse me?" But they're already gone. You realize it's not a joke. Snoring loudly was once considered indecorous in noble households because it suggested poor discipline or indulgent living. People were judged for how gracefully they slept. The palace measured everything. As you return to the more populated section of the residence, the lighting brightens. Candles burn in neat rows. Guards stand at casual attention, eyes alert but unfocused, as though they've trained themselves to notice movement without betraying surprise. You sense something else too. The court doesn't simply observe behavior, it predicts it. Historians still argue whether monarchs truly demanded such obsessive oversight or whether courtiers built the surveillance culture themselves out of paranoia. Was the Queen genuinely interested in who tossed and turned at night? Or was the court so fearful of offending her that they created a system where even your dreams felt regulated? Either interpretation makes the palace whisper around you like a living thing. You stop near a window overlooking the inner courtyard. Torches flicker below, illuminating the faint outlines of sentries pacing their routes. Watching, recording, notating every opening door, every late-night conversation, every sigh that carries too far on the wind. And then the sensation strikes you. You're being watched at this very moment, not aggressively, not threateningly, just persistently, like the palace is taking slow, careful notes. You turn, and there she is, a lady-in-waiting in soft cream linen, brushing dust off the windowsill with the edge of her sleeve. She pretends to be entirely absorbed in housekeeping, but her eyes slide toward you with the quiet expertise of someone who has been trained to observe without appearing to. She meets your gaze for half a heartbeat. Then she says, "Your candle burned late last night." You freeze. "How do you know that?" She tilts her head. We all know these things. Her tone is not threatening. It's simply factual. Your third joke of the night comes in as a nervous whisper. At this point, even your pillow probably fills out a daily report. The lady moves on, gliding down the hall, leaving you with the unsettling realization that here at court, nighttime offers no refuge. People monitor who rises early, who sleeps late, who paces, who cries, who whispers. Bedrooms are not sanctuaries, they're performance stages with blankets. You continue walking, feeling the palace's invisible gaze soften around you, not gone, just less pointed. You've learned something essential tonight. Court life doesn't end at dusk, it only changes shape. The walls might stop echoing with music, but they never stop echoing with intention. Here, even your rest is observed, even your stillness is interpreted, even your silence is political. And as you make your way toward the dim guest chambers prepared for you, you finally understand the heart of tonight's lesson. To survive the English court, you don't just guard your words. You guard your sleep. You wake the next morning to the soft shuffle of footsteps somewhere beyond your door. Too close to be random, too purposeful to be innocent. The palace begins its day long before the sun finishes rising, because information doesn't sleep, and neither do the people who hope to profit from it. You stretch slowly, careful not to make any sound that might drift into the corridor. After last night's revelation, that even your snores can become political commentary, you're not taking chances. When you finally step into the hallway, the air feels different. Livelier, charged, like dozens of whispered conversations have already stitched themselves into a net, waiting for someone, maybe you, to wander into it. And tonight, you're learning another fundamental rule of the English court. Eavesdropping isn't merely a bad habit here, it's survival, or sabotage, depending on who's listening. You walk toward the great gallery, its long windows spilling early light onto polished floors. Servants hurry past carrying breakfast trays, letters, and gossip disguised as casual remarks. Their voices rise and fall like waves, and you notice how often conversations end just as you approach. Not suspiciously, not dramatically, just smoothly, seamlessly, as if everyone here has practiced the art of being overheard only when they choose. The English court thrives on information, not official proclamations, but murmured fragments, half-laughed comments, seemingly accidental revelations. And here comes your mainstream historical fact. Henry VIII's court was notorious for its culture of spying. Ambassadors wrote constantly about how rumors traveled faster than couriers. Even the kitchens weren't safe. People claimed cooks sometimes passed along secrets while stirring stews. Information seeped everywhere, like steam through cracked tiles. You pause near a doorway draped with heavy brocade. Behind it, voices hum in a rhythmic pattern. 3 words, pause, 2 words, pause, and an occasional breathless exhale. You're not trying to eavesdrop, or so you tell yourself, but the palace is designed like a giant acoustic trap. Sound folds around corners. Words ricochet. Nothing stays where it originates. A lady's voice floats through the brocade, and not sit beside her today, not after yesterday's ribbon. A second voice answers quickly, then shift seats early before she sees. You don't know who she is or what the ribbon meant, but the tone alone tells you enough. Alliances reshaped overnight, again. Then your first joke of the night slips in with a sly grin. Honestly, you could replace half the political advisors here with a few well-trained parrots, and no one would notice the difference. You keep moving because lingering too long outside any doorway is risky. Lingering suggests curiosity, and curiosity suggests intent. The English court has a special radar for intent, real or imagined. As you enter the gallery, sunlight scatters across portraits lining the walls. The faces in them watch you with that familiar expression, the grave, tragic knowingness of people who lived long enough to regret hearing too much. Courtiers from decades earlier, wrapped, regal, rigid, pose in clothing stiff enough to double as armor. They lived in worlds of whispered betrayals and subtle surveillance, just like you. Some thrived, others didn't. You try not to think about which category you'd end up in. Ahead of you stands a small cluster of courtiers pretending not to converse. Fans flutter, sleeves rustle, throats clear softly. No one speaks plainly, they never do. The closest thing to honesty in this place is the crack of laughter that accidentally slips out when someone says something painfully accurate. You glide past, and a gentleman lowers his voice just enough to let you catch the words, "Told the Queen she wasn't informed." Another gasps, "She wasn't, that's bold." A third adds, "Bold, it's suicidal." You're not meant to hear these snippets, yet they land in your lap like breadcrumbs. That's the strange duality of court life. People pretend their secrets are precious while scattering them everywhere like confetti. You continue walking until you reach a small alcove overlooking the courtyard. And standing there, the woman in the cream linen from last night, her posture immaculate, her expression carved into that careful neutrality. She doesn't greet you, she simply tilts her head, acknowledging your existence like one acknowledges a candle, useful but potentially flammable. "You walked loudly this morning," she murmurs. You blink. "I walked loudly?" She gives a slow nod. Loud footsteps mean certainty. People will assume you learned something. You didn't. But now you worry that others think you did. In this palace, perception outruns truth by several miles. You ask, "Should I walk softly?" Her lips curve, not into a smile, but into the ghost of one. Soft footsteps mean secrecy. People will assume you're hiding something. You stare at her. "So what is the correct way to walk here?" She shrugs gracefully. Historians still argue whether there is a correct way. There it is, your scholarly debate for this section, delivered as naturally as morning breath in a palace that monitors morning breath. You leave her at the window and head downstairs toward the inner courtyard. The moment you step outside, the soundscape changes. The air fills with quiet conversations, guards murmuring, stable boys muttering, ladies walking arm in arm, whispering as though sharing sinful confessions. But as you approach a pair of gardeners trimming ornamental shrubs, your attention sharpens. Not because they look suspicious, quite the opposite. They look too ordinary, and that's how you know they're dangerous. One says to the other, "He arrived late to the Privy Council." The second replies, "Late? Then he's out of favour." You freeze. These men shouldn't know such things, and yet servants usually know everything. A quirky tidbit nudges its way in. Palace staff regularly shared more accurate political predictions than ambassadors. Some foreign envoys admitted this in private letters, complaining that they spent weeks negotiating while laundresses predicted outcomes over steaming linens. You step closer, just near enough to overhear without obviously loitering. His valet said he barely slept. The first adds. The second hums thoughtfully. No wonder he misread her tone at supper. Misread her tone at supper? You're not sure whose tone or whose supper, but even the misunderstanding of a single syllable can apparently alter a man's career. And here comes your second joke of the night. Imagine explaining to a modern employer that you need time off because you misunderstood the Queen's eyebrow gesture. You walk on before they notice you listening. The palace isn't shy about punishing those who gather too much information, but it punishes ignorance even more. It's a delicate balance, 1 foot in knowledge, 1 foot in plausible deniability. Through the archway you see 3 noblewomen strolling together, speaking in voices smooth as silk ribbon. They pretend not to see you. That's how you know they've noticed you. The first murmurs, "He walked the gallery early." The second adds, "Early? Interesting." The third tilts her chin. He must have heard something. And just like that, your morning becomes tomorrow's whisper. You retreat to the safety of a stone pillar, letting the sun warm your hands. A guard shifts beside you, his armor gleaming in patches of gold. He leans in just enough to be heard, his voice dry but not unkind. Don't worry, rumours here burn hot, but they burn out fast. You exhale softly. How fast? He grins. Fast enough that by supper you'll be accused of something completely different. Your third joke slides in like a shrug. Great, so court gossip works on a rotating schedule. He straightens, then adds, but remember this, the real danger isn't being talked about, it's when people stop talking about you. And with that he returns to his post, leaving you standing in the courtyard's crisp morning light, fully aware that every whispered syllable floating through this place could either lift you or swallow you whole. Because in the English court, eavesdropping is survival, and being overheard is inevitable. By mid-afternoon, the palace hums with a different kind of tension, soft, fragrant, deceptively pleasant. The great hall is being prepared for a meal, but not the kind where people simply eat. Here, dining is a battlefield, utensils are signals, and every seat is a political declaration wearing a silk napkin. You hover near the entrance as servants lay out trenchers, spoons, knives, and goblets with a precision that borders on spiritual devotion. The first thing you notice is how no one rushes inside. People gather in loose clusters, glancing sideways at one another. They're not waiting for food, they're waiting to see where everyone else sits first. Because at the English court, seating charts aren't just formalities, they're fate. A mainstream historical fact rises smoothly into place. Tudor and Stuart monarchs controlled dining arrangements meticulously. Who sat where indicated status, favour, alliances, or punishment. Even slight adjustments, moving you one seat closer to the monarch, could change your entire social trajectory. Ambassadors practically wrote novels about dinner placements. You step forward cautiously, feeling the marble floor cool beneath your soles. The hall glows with candlelit gleam. Tapestries ripple gently in the draught, depicting lions, saints, and several people who look suspiciously smug about having survived previous dinners. Servants glide between tables, making microscopic adjustments, turning a knife 1 degree inward, repositioning goblets, smoothing the cloth so it falls exactly evenly. Everything is intentional, everything says something. Someone behind you clears their throat, a subtle warning. You've drifted too close to a table you're not supposed to approach yet. You step back. 2 inches, enough to show awareness, not enough to show embarrassment. A woman in burgundy silk floats to your side. You can't tell whether she appeared or materialized. Careful, she murmurs. Stand too near the lower table and you'll be mistaken for someone hoping to be seated there. Stand too near the upper table and you'll be mistaken for someone delusional. You offer a polite nod, which she does not return. She simply glides away, leaving you to contemplate the absurdity of this place. Your first joke of the night surfaces. Honestly, the English court could teach modern airlines a thing or two about seat-based humiliation. Eventually, an usher gestures you forward, but not where you expect, not near the top table, not near the bottom, but somewhere in the middle, the ambiguous zone. This is where courtiers are placed when the crown hasn't decided what to think of them yet. You take your seat as lightly as if the chair might bite. Around you, the choreography begins. Men sit with one hand resting lightly on the table. Women fold their sleeves with deliberate grace. Everyone pretends the act of sitting is effortless. But you notice the subtle angles of their bodies, some leaning slightly forward to show interest, others slightly back to show disdain. Some tilt their heads toward powerful neighbors, others freeze like marble sculptures to avoid being looped into conversations they shouldn't hear. Plates arrive. Silverware gleams. The sound of spoons tapping against trenchers becomes its own secret code. Then comes the fringe tidbit. Medieval and early modern English courts often ate using a shared salt cellar placed between diners, but its placement mattered. If the salt sat closer to you, you were above the salt, signaling prestige. Farther away, below the salt, meaning lower rank. People tracked salt placement like stock market prices. You locate the salt cellar. It is not on your side. You pretend not to care. The Queen's arrival shifts the entire hall. People rise, bow, curtsy. You follow suit, careful not to dip too deeply. Excessive enthusiasm is suspicious, remember? When the Queen sits, the room exhales and the meal begins. Except this isn't really a meal, it's an audition for competence. First course, a broth that smells faintly of saffron and quiet judgment. You lift your spoon, slowly, elegantly. You remember the rule you've heard whispered: never scoop outward, scoop inward. Outward scooping signals haste, and haste signals weakness. Across from you, a young nobleman scoops outward. 3 people notice and pity him. A gentleman beside you leans in just enough to mutter, "He won't be invited next week." You whisper back, "For scooping?" He nods gravely. Etiquette reveals character. And that's when your second joke arrives. Thank goodness modern job interviews don't include a spoon exam. Conversation begins in delicate threads. People speak without speaking, sentences half-formed, meanings tucked between pauses. You hear phrases like, "How fortunate you still hold that estate." Translation, "We thought you'd lost it." And "The Queen seemed contemplative today." Translation, "Someone will be punished soon." You try contributing a small remark about the weather. Safe, right? Weather is neutral. Weather is universal. Wrong. 2 courtiers exchange glances. Your comment was apparently interpreted as, "I heard something about the harvest," which was interpreted as, "I am commenting on tax revenues," which was interpreted as, "I am hinting at dissent." Great. You clamp your lips shut before you accidentally start a civil war. Then comes the sound every courtier fears, the Queen laughing, not because her laugh is threatening, though it certainly can be, but because when the monarch laughs, everyone must react correctly. React too quickly and you appear sycophantic. React too slowly and you appear sullen. React too loudly and you seem desperate. So when her laughter spills across the table like sunlight, you allow yourself a soft chuckle, soft, measured, respectful. Across the hall, a lord bursts into laughter a beat too late. Half the table turns toward him. His eyes widen. You silently wish him well. Servants bring the second course, roast meats glazed in something sticky and fragrant. You cut your portion delicately, remembering not to let the knife scrape your plate, a vulgarity worse than shouting. Nearby, a lady's bracelet clinks against her goblet. Not loudly, but pointedly. A signal. But to whom? At court, meals double as communication networks, a tap of metal, a lift of a goblet, a pause before swallowing. Each gesture carries implication. You begin noticing these subtle signals everywhere. A man wipes his mouth too deliberately. A woman adjusts her napkin with performative calm. A servant replaces a goblet without being asked. Dangerous sign. Historians still argue whether the court truly maintained a secret dining code or whether modern readers simply project complexity onto social rituals. But anyone sitting here, surrounded by flickering candlelight and cryptic body language, would agree there was definitely a code. Dessert arrives, marchpane moulded into castles and roses, beautiful, sugary, potentially poisonous, if you believe half the rumours. You nibble anyway, because refusing a royal dessert is a bigger risk than eating one. As the final plates are cleared, the Queen rises. Everyone follows. The meal is over, but the political damage has only just begun. You can practically feel the gossip brewing like storm clouds. Your final joke slips in with weary affection. Honestly, dinner at the English court is just a polite food-based panic attack. You step away from the table, your movements smooth, your face serene, your heart pounding like a drum in a festival procession. You made it through, one spoon, one glance, one breadcrumb of meaning at a time. And as you leave the hall, you understand something new. Here, dining isn't nourishment, it's negotiation. The hall slowly empties after the meal, leaving behind only the lingering aromas of roasted meats, sugared marchpane, and quiet humiliation. You drift into the adjoining gallery, relieved to escape the battlefield of spoons and glances, until you realize you've stepped into a new war entirely. Here, the weapons aren't utensils, they're facial expressions, because at the English court, politeness is never just politeness. It's strategy, it's armor, it's a knife dipped in honey. You walk past a line of windows as late afternoon sun spills across the parquet floor. Courtiers cluster in elegant little knots, each smiling with such refined sweetness, you're surprised the bees haven't declared them honorary members of the hive. Those smiles shine with warmth, gentleness, and pure, concentrated danger. A lady draped in lavender silk approaches another, offering a compliment so radiant it could power a small city. "Your gown is exquisite today," she says. The tone, heavenly, the eyes, calculating, the subtext. "I see you trying to rise. Good luck." And just like that, you're thrust into the rule of the day. Some smiles sharpen rather than soften. A mainstream historical fact slides into place. Courtiers in the Tudor and Stuart eras were expected to perform elaborate politeness rituals, exchanging compliments, bows, and soft-spoken praise. These weren't optional displays of manners, they were compulsory political performances. Failure to flatter the right person or missing a cue could damage alliances faster than open conflict. You watch another exchange as a lord pats a rival's shoulder with cordial friendliness. It looks supportive, encouraging, even affectionate. Except his fingers press just a fraction too firmly, a signal everyone reads instantly. Several heads turn. A silent verdict is passed, a challenge, a warning, or perhaps the beginning of a slower, subtler feud. Your first joke of the night arrives right on time. In this place, even hugs probably come with footnotes. You continue down the gallery, adjusting your posture to the court's signature blend of ease and vigilance. Every gesture must appear effortless, even when your mind is frantically trying to decode 20 unwritten rules at once. A noblewoman with a waterfall of auburn curls glides toward you, her expression glowing with what appears to be angelic kindness. She lifts her fan, embroidered with roses so red they practically shout, and murmurs, "I must tell you, your presence at table did not go unnoticed." You smile, unsure whether this is good or very, very bad. "Ah," she continues softly. There were whispers. Your stomach knots. She laughs lightly. "Don't worry, whispers are the court's favorite pastime. You should only fret when people stop whispering." And then, without warning, she moves on, leaving you with a compliment, a warning, and a headache. As you try to recover, a gentleman in sapphire velvet intercepts you with a cheerful grin. "Marvelous poise during the meal," he says, though some felt your silence was intriguing. Intriguing, the curse word of court vocabulary. Means everything, means nothing, means we're going to talk about you later, probably inaccurately. Historians still argue whether courtiers truly intended half the layers of meaning their words carried, or whether later writers exaggerated the complexity. But surviving even 1 hour here convinces you that subtlety wasn't an accident, it was the palace's primary export. You find solace in the window for a moment. Outside, gardeners prune hedges with the serenity of monks. How peaceful their world seems. Simple, predictable, unpolitical. Until you remember yesterday's gossip overheard from those same gardeners and realize even the shrubbery probably isn't safe from strategic trimming. A lady approaches wearing a smile so tight it could cut glass. "I do hope you enjoyed your marchpane," she says. You nod. "Very much." How delightful. Some found it too sweet, but sweetness can be so revealing, don't you think? Her smile widens, not kindly. "Ah, there it is, a knife made of sugar." Your second joke strolls by. Honestly, this place should come with a caution weaponized friendliness sign. You pivot, trying to blend deeper into the crowd of conversational daggers disguised as compliments. But blending is hard when everyone critiques your blending technique. People examine your expressions, the tilt of your smile, even the relaxation level of your eyebrows. You overhear more weaponized niceties. Oh, you look well rested. Translation, you slept while others strategized. Your new friend seems charming. Translation, they're trouble. How lovely to see you again. Translation, I wish I hadn't. A trio of courtiers approaches a noble with a smile so warm it could melt butter. Your performance at table was admirable, one says. Another adds, yes, your restraint was noted. The third sighs contentedly. Restraint is so rare these days. The man bows gratefully. They walk away the moment he turns, their faces dropping like masks removed after a play. You study the exchange with dawning clarity. Here, compliments often aren't compliments. They're evaluations disguised as praise. Warnings hidden in pleasantries. Invitations wrapped in velvet with teeth underneath. You feel a small tug at your sleeve. It's the cream linen lady from earlier. She leans in. You're doing well, she murmurs. You exhale in relief. Then she adds, be careful with smiling. Too wide reads desperate. Too soft reads aloof. Too symmetrical reads practiced. Too asymmetrical reads insincere. You stare at her. So how should I smile? She shrugs. Historians still argue about that. Then she walks away, leaving you to wonder if the correct smile even exists. You move toward a quieter corner, where two courtiers exchange what appears to be gentle laughter. But when you listen closely, the words carry spikes. Oh, your lace is exquisite. Where did you find such a daring pattern? Translation, it's too bold. And your shoes, wonderfully unconventional. Translation, they're inappropriate. You must tell me your tailor, he is adventurous. Translation, fire him. Your final joke of the section strolls in, dressed in full sarcasm. If the English court invented Yelp reviews, no restaurant would survive the week. You inhale slowly, letting the tension settle into something you can actually swallow. Because the truth is, something profound is happening inside you. You're learning the rhythm, with the performance, the dance of pretty words with pointed edges. You're learning how to turn your smile into a shield, your politeness into a strategy, your silence into a diplomatic masterpiece. And as the gallery glows with soft evening light, you finally understand. At the English court, everyone is polite, but some smiles are sharper than daggers, and some compliments are traps waiting to spring. Still, you're starting to recognize them. And that means you're beginning to belong. Evening drapes itself across the palace like a velvet curtain, soft but suffocating. The corridors glow with candlelight, and the air hums with that familiar, restless energy, like everyone is waiting for something to happen, even if they won't admit it. You've survived proximity, gifts, clothing, dining, and smiles with serrated edges. Tonight, the palace introduces a new danger, punishments wrapped so elegantly in politeness that you almost feel grateful for them. You make your way toward the Queen's presence chamber, where the court is gathering again. The atmosphere feels slightly off. Lighter, maybe, but in the way a storm feels light right before it cracks open. People are smiling too widely, complimenting too generously, stepping aside with a touch too much ceremony. Someone is going to be punished, and the palace is already stretching its jaws. A mainstream historical fact unfurls in your mind. In the English court, punishments were almost never public outbursts. Monarchs rarely screamed, rarely raged. Instead, consequences were delivered through quiet demotions, cold silences, seating reassignments, revoked invitations, or, worst of all, being politely ignored. Being ignored at court was not an inconvenience. It was a slow erasure. You enter the chamber and your skin prickles. People aren't talking about someone. People are talking around someone. That someone stands in the center of the room, a nobleman in dove-grey silk. He looks normal enough, calm, poised, but no one meets his gaze, no one includes him in their circles. The court moves around him like water around a stone. But more telling, they smile as they do it. Your first joke of the night arrives. Court punishment is the only system where people ruin your life with impeccable manners. You observe the nobleman carefully. His posture is perfect, his face serene, but his fingers worry the edge of his cuff. You've seen this before, the quiet panic of someone who's just realized they've been socially exiled. A lady drifts past him with a soft, "How pleasant to see you," while stepping just far enough away to avoid being pulled into conversation. A gentleman offers him a nod so shallow it might as well be a denial of existence. You whisper to someone near you, "What did he do?" The courtier barely moves their lips. He didn't do anything. He failed to do something. What? Prevent suspicion. Ah, that explains everything and nothing, which is exactly how the palace prefers it. You retreat slightly, watching the ritual unfold. This isn't banishment. Not officially. It's unofficial demotion wrapped in sugar and silk. Nearby, a pair of ladies exchange glances. One murmurs, "Such a shame." The other sighs delicately. He seemed promising. A man joins them. But perhaps this is kindness. To be corrected gently is better than to be corrected harshly. You blink. Corrected? They speak as though the crown is offering him a gift rather than delivering a blow. Historians still argue whether monarchs deliberately used subtle punishments to maintain psychological control, or whether courtiers created this ecosystem themselves to self-police. Maybe rulers liked the efficiency. Maybe they didn't even notice it happening. Either way, fear was kept tidy, quiet, and socially acceptable, like everything else here. You drift deeper into the chamber where another form of discipline is taking place, forced politeness. Two lords bow to each other with smiles so strained you're convinced their cheek muscles are staging a revolt. They exchange pleasantries about land disputes, inheritances, and unfortunate misunderstandings. Their words are sweet, their eyes are knives. You overhear, "My good friend, I trust you received my note." "Indeed, a most clarifying message." "I am relieved to hear you say so." "Truly, that surprises me." They bow again, deeper. Both walk away looking victorious. You have no idea who won. Another small cluster watches them depart, whispering. The crown insists on harmony. Yes, nothing strengthens unity like being forced to make nice with your rival. Their laughter is soft, controlled, terrifying. You step near a tapestry depicting a hunting scene. The stags look startled, as though they too are witnessing something uncomfortable. A lady approaches you, smiling warmly. "How delightful that you've come to observe tonight's adjustments." You gulp. "Adjustments?" "Yes," she says. "The court operates like a clock. Sometimes gears slip, so we realign them." You raise a brow. "By humiliating people politely." She gives a soft laugh. "Humiliation?" "Oh no, we simply encourage self-reflection through strategic absence." Your second joke of the night ambles in. This place could trademark ghosting centuries before dating apps existed. You follow her gaze back to the grey silk nobleman. He stands motionless as more courtiers drift past, offering him thin compliments, brittle smiles, and the kind of emotional distance one normally reserves for venomous creatures. Yet no one says anything cruel, no insults, no raised voices, just a symphony of quiet dismissal. A servant brushes by you with a tray of wine. The servant pauses only for a heartbeat before passing the nobleman entirely. No drink offered, not even a glance. And that single omission lands harder than any shouted accusation. You whisper, "Is that intentional?" A courtier beside you answers, "Everything is intentional." You inhale sharply, feeling the invisible machinery of court discipline turning around you. This place doesn't cut you open, it lets you bleed in silence. You decide to leave the chamber before someone mistakes you for a gear in need of adjusting. But just as you turn, the cream linen lady appears at your elbow, because of course she does. "Notice how no one confronts him?" she says softly. "Yes." "That is the mercy." You stare. "Mercy?" She tilts her head. "It gives him time to correct himself before harsher measures are required." "Harsher measures? You decide not to ask." She continues, "Be wary of praise tonight. Praise is the language of warning." You blink. "I thought praise was..." "Praise." Her smile is gentle and devastating. "Not here." Then she floats away, leaving you anchored to the floor by a new rule. At the English court, punishment arrives wrapped in velvet, and praise often delivers it. As you exit the room, you hear someone call after you in a warm, friendly tone, "Do take care this evening, you've been noticed lately." You don't turn around. You don't respond. You simply keep walking because that is the only safe move. Your final joke of the section whispers in your ear, "If kindness here ever felt genuine, you'd probably faint from shock." You round the corner and disappear into the quieter corridor, heart pounding but step steady. You're starting to understand how this world works. No one raises their voice, no one points a finger, but everyone knows when someone is falling. And tonight you learned just how elegantly the English court lets them fall. The corridors feel different tonight. Quieter, yes, but not peacefully so. It's the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the ground still vibrates with leftover lightning. The nobleman in grey silk is nowhere to be seen now, but his absence stains the hall like a faint bruise. People move gently around the space he used to occupy. Not out of sympathy, no, the English court does not waste sympathy, but out of calculation. When one player falls, the board rearranges itself. You drift toward the Queen's long gallery, drawn by a soft murmur that trembles through the palace like wind in reeds. But this isn't wind, it's rumour, the unofficial monarch of the English court. If actual power is held by the crown, then perceived power belongs entirely to whispers. As soon as you enter the gallery, you feel rumours weaving around you in warm, fragrant waves. Courtiers stroll casually, hands clasped, smiles soft, voices gentle. But listen closely. Beneath those velvet tones, the real machinery of the kingdom grinds. "Did you hear? I'm told that someone saw..." They say... These phrases float through the air like pollen. Sticky, persistent, ready to land anywhere and grow into something monstrous. A mainstream historical fact glides into place. Ambassadors at the Tudor and Stuart courts frequently complained that rumours spread faster than official proclamations. A whisper in the privy chamber could leap to the gardens, morph in the kitchens, and arrive in France by the week's end as absolute truth. The English court was a printing press of misinformation, long before printing presses were common. You watch a small knot of ladies drifting near a tapestry of St. George. Their voices are so low you barely catch the words, but you don't need the details. The energy alone tells the story. They're feeding a rumour, shaping it, editing it like a group of playwrights, rewriting a scene before opening night. You approach the window pretending to admire the twilight sky. And from behind you, the whispers sharpen. "Didn't bow quickly enough. The Queen saw everything." Of course he pretended not to notice. "I've heard his family's nervous." "They're not talking about you." "Not tonight." But the fact that your first instinct was to assume they were tells you everything you need to know about court life. Your first joke floats in like someone poking you gently with a fan. The English court is basically a medieval version of Twitter, except the consequences are way harsher, and the hashtags are embroidered onto sleeves. You shift your stance slightly, scanning the room. Rumours drift like smoke, curling into each conversation, reshaping social gravity. People lean in just enough to seem innocent, just enough to seem informed. The court's greatest fear isn't being caught doing wrong, it's being the last to know that someone might be doing wrong. A gentleman in emerald velvet approaches two others with an expression of theatrical concern. "I hesitate to repeat this," he begins, which means, of course, he's dying to repeat it. "But I heard she refused the Queen's gift last night." The two men gasp softly. One whispers, "Refused?" The other murmurs, "Reckless." Then, without missing a beat, all three adjust their postures and pretend the conversation never happened. But in the space of 5 seconds, a rumour has sprouted legs, arms, teeth, and a future. Historians still argue whether specific court scandals had real foundations or whether they were entirely fabricated by bored courtiers. Some suggest that powerful families engineered rumours to weaken rivals. Others believe that many scandals were little more than misunderstandings blown out of proportion by anxious servants. The truth is probably both, twisted together into something neither fully real nor fully imaginary. You turn to leave, but a familiar presence slips into your path. The cream linen lady. "We must speak," she says in a voice as soft as candlelight. You tense. "Am I in trouble?" She blinks slowly. "Everyone is always in trouble." You exhale. "Reassuring," she continues. "You've been listening well, but now you must learn the deeper rule." You lean in, feeling the gallery's hush tighten around you. "Rumours wear crowns," she whispers. "Whoever shapes them shapes the court." A chill slides down your spine. Rumours aren't just stories, they're currency, weapons, invitations, warnings. She gestures subtly toward a group of young courtiers gathered near the hearth. Their smiles are bright, their laughter gentle. They look harmless until you notice how their eyes flick toward each new arrival. "Watch," she murmurs. A woman enters the gallery wearing a gown embroidered with silver roses. Elegant, dignified, entirely respectable. The group by the hearth falls silent for half a heartbeat. Then someone murmurs almost inaudibly, "Silver roses, unusual choice?" Another hums thoughtfully. A third tilts their head as though considering a puzzle. Nothing is said outright, no accusation, no insult. But the seed is planted, and by tomorrow morning, people will whisper, "She wore silver roses." By noon, she wore an unusual gown. By evening, she meant something with that gown. And by next week, she signaled a political allegiance by wearing silver roses. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't, it doesn't matter. The rumour now wears its own crown. Your second joke steps in helpfully. At this point, the safest thing to wear here is invisibility, and even that probably offends someone. You breathe deeply, letting the enormity of this rule settle into your bones. But the cream linen lady isn't finished. "There are 3 kinds of rumours," she whispers. "The harmless ones, the helpful ones, and the holy terrors." You ask, "Which kind is most common?" She smiles with her eyes, not her lips. "The kind no one admits to spreading." She moves away, gliding down the gallery like a quiet prophecy. You turn your attention to a group of gentlemen now bending over a small chessboard. Their conversation drifts lazily. "I heard he may be invited to the hunt." "I heard he refused the Queen's marchpane." "I heard the ambassador looked displeased." I heard. Like clockwork, like heartbeat, like prayer, a quirky tidbit pops into view. Some courtiers kept literal notebooks of overheard rumours, not for amusement, but for self-protection. That way, if they were ever accused of spreading something unflattering, they could document where they'd first heard it. Early modern receipts. You wander toward the gallery's exit, grateful for a chance to breathe air that hasn't been exhaled through 5 layers of subtext. But before you can escape, a young page stops in front of you, eyes wide and shimmering with the glee of someone who has absolutely no idea they're holding a live grenade. "My lord," he says breathlessly, "someone said you walked in the gardens this morning." You blink, and that's all. He beams as though delivering wonderful news. You nearly collapse. Your third joke sweeps in with exquisite timing. Great. Even walking is now a potential scandal. Next thing you know, you'll need royal permission to blink. The page scampers off, leaving behind a tiny rumour that means nothing, yet might grow into something later, depending on who waters it. You step into the quieter hallway, heart beating with a strange mixture of fear, awe, and resignation. Because tonight, you finally understand. At the English court, truth is optional. Rumours are inevitable. And perception, well, that's everything. You square your shoulders, inhale slowly, and keep walking. Because if rumours wear crowns, you'd better learn how to keep yours from toppling. The palace is quieter tonight. Quieter, but not calm. Calm doesn't exist here. Not truly. Not in a place where every polished floorboard and embroidered cushion seems to hold its breath, waiting to see which story will rise next, which courtier will slip, and which smile will turn sharp. You walk slowly through a narrow corridor lit by wavering candle flames, feeling the weight of everything you've learned pressing softly against your spine. Proximity, gifts, clothing, privacy, eavesdropping, dining, smiles, punishments, rumours, each rule a thread, each thread pulling you deeper into a tapestry woven long before you arrived. Tonight, you reach the centre of that tapestry, the place where all the hidden rules reveal their purpose. When you enter the Queen's privy garden, the scent of crushed mint drifts through the air. Lanterns cast warm light along the hedges, and the court gathers in loose spirals beneath the twilight sky. But something feels different now, softer, more distilled, as if the day's noise has been strained through silk, leaving only the most essential tensions behind. This is where you begin to understand the rule no one admits exists, the rule that governs all the others, the invisible rule-book the English court holds but never names. A narrow path winds between rose bushes, their petals glowing faintly under lantern light. Courtiers stroll there with the careful lightness of people pretending to be carefree. Compliments drift like pollen. Soft laughter rises like mist. But beneath it all, the quiet thrum of awareness pulses steadily. Every step matters, every word matters, every nothing matters. A mainstream historical fact settles into place. The English court operated on a deeply entrenched system of ritualized hierarchy, one so ingrained that even monarchs struggled to change it. Etiquette wasn't simply etiquette, it was the architecture of power, and once built, it shaped everyone who lived inside it, from crown to scullery. You find a stone bench near an ivy-covered wall and take a cautious seat. Several courtiers glance your way, not to judge your sitting posture, though they probably are, but to interpret what your sitting means. Are you resting, waiting, listening, avoiding? Meaning here is never in what you do. Meaning here is in what people think you're doing implies. Your first joke of the night wanders in like a leaf on the breeze. If the English court ever held a game of charades, every round would end in treason charges. A soft step approaches. Of course, it's her. The cream linen lady gliding toward you with the same quiet inevitability as moonlight. "You're progressing quickly," she says, standing where the lantern glow outlines her silhouette. You give a weary smile. "I feel like I'm barely keeping up." That's what it feels like for everyone, she replies, even those who pretend otherwise. You gesture vaguely at the garden, at the careful dances of polite conversation floating around you. Is there truly a rule book, a structure, something that explains how all of this holds together? She sits beside you, not close, not far, exactly the distance the court considers safe for semi-intimate conversation. Then she tells you the truth. There is no rule book. A pause. And yet, she adds softly, there is only the rule book. You stare at her, baffled. She smiles, not sharply, not sweetly, but with genuine warmth that startles you. The rule book is the court itself. We write it as we live it. Historians still argue whether the hidden etiquette of the English court developed organically or was consciously crafted by monarchs seeking control. Was it a slow evolution, a deliberate trap, a cultural accident that became institutionalized? No one agrees. No one will ever agree. The truth is lost in the flicker between power and performance. The cream linen lady continues, every gesture you've learned, every silence, every step, none were created by decree. They were created by need. Need? Safety, she corrects. Survival. Those who lacked rules perished. Those who shaped rules endured, and so the court became its own law. The wind brushes the roses, scattering their scent. You feel something shift inside you, understanding maybe. Or surrender. Nearby, a gentleman bows a fraction too deeply. The person receiving the bow tilts their head in a way that signals forgiveness. Another duet of etiquette completed, another stitch in the tapestry reinforced. Your quirky tidbit arrives with perfect timing. Some foreign visitors reported that the English court's obsession with undetectable rules made it the most exhausting place in Christendom. One ambassador claimed he needed a second ambassador just to interpret the gestures of the first. He wasn't joking. The cream linen lady gestures toward the entire garden. All of this, the smiles, the steps, the whispers, is a language, not spoken aloud, not written down, but binding, powerful, and dangerous. You breathe slowly. And what happens if someone refuses to speak it? She doesn't answer at first. Her eyes drift to the far corner of the garden where a solitary figure sits alone, no conversations around him, no glances cast his way, no invitations reaching him. The nobleman in grey silk, erased, not by decree, by courtesy. Finally, she says, then the court speaks for them. You feel the weight of those words slide across your shoulders like a cloak you didn't ask for. Another courtier approaches you now, a man in embroidered gold whose smile seems genuine, almost suspiciously so. I must congratulate you, he says, bowing his head. For what? You ask, carefully. For adapting, he answers. Many newcomers drown. You're learning to swim. You give a modest smile, neither proud nor dismissive, because either extreme would be misinterpreted. He adds, just remember, nobody knows all the rules, not even those who made them. Your second joke of the night nudges in politely. At this point, it's comforting to know even the experts are faking it. The man moves on, already whispering something to someone else. You don't try to interpret it. Some layers of meaning are too exhausting to peel back. You turn to the cream linen lady, but she's already rising. Stay aware, she murmurs. But don't be consumed. The court rewards those who understand the rules and devours those who worship them. Then she vanishes into the drifting groups of courtiers, swallowed by silk and lantern light. You're left alone on the stone bench, breathing slowly, feeling the palace shift into its nighttime cadence. Voices soften, lanterns dim, conversations melt into murmurs, and somewhere in that blur you catch the faintest shape of the truth. The English court isn't ruled by the monarch alone. It's ruled by belief, by perception, by a rulebook that everyone denies and everyone obeys. Your final joke settles in with a fond sigh, and unlike normal rule books, you don't get to read this one. You just get judged on the exam. You rise from the bench. You walk back toward the palace, not boldly, not timidly, just with the quiet confidence of someone who finally sees the invisible scaffolding holding the world together. Because tonight you've uncovered the rulebook no one admits exists, and in doing so you've earned your place inside it. And now, as the last lanterns fade and the palace settles into its slow, rhythmic breathing, let your own breath soften too. Let each exhale loosen the threads of tension that gathered through these winding halls, until even the sharpest whispers melt into something gentle and distant. Picture the quiet garden again, the roses dim, the night air cool, the pathways drowsy and safe beneath your feet. Nothing to decipher now, nothing to perform, nothing to fear. Just the soft hush of a world growing still, inviting you to drift wherever your mind feels lightest. Let the hidden rules fall away, one by one, until only calm remains.